Thanks everybody for joining us today. We're excited to talk about Last Gangster in Austin, Frank Smith, Ronnie Earl, and the end of a junkyard mafia with author Jesse Sublett. If you're watching online and you have questions, please post them in the chat and I'll ask them of Jesse. And for those of you who are in the room, be thinking about what you'd like to ask and we'll get to questions at the end of the program. So let me start by introducing Jesse. He is an author, artist, and musician from Austin, Texas. And although best known for his nonfiction work, his career as a published author began with a series of crime novels featuring a blues-based playing detective in Austin. He also helped shake up the Austin music scene in the late 70s as an original member of the city's first two punk bands, the Skunks and the Violators. And in recent years, his visual artwork has garnered acclaim among fans and private collectors. He currently lives in Hollywood with his wife, Lois Richwine, and 3 cats. So welcome. I'm happy to have you here. Do you want to start by talking a little bit about the book and doing a short passage?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'm very excited about the book. It's my favorite one so far, I guess. And so I love talking about it and getting people's reactions to it because they've been good. So yeah, I like to start with the introduction because it kind of sets up things in a nice way, I guess. Junkyard owner, shotguns robber was a setup. And here we go. December 3rd, 1976 fell on a Friday, the last month of the bicentennial year, and the crackle, boom, racket just after sunset sounded a lot like fireworks, except it wasn't. People were shooting at each other at the Austin Salvage Pool, a sprawling automotive boneyard out in the rural industrial borderlands of southeast Austin. Inside the converted chicken coop that served as a temporary business office were the owners, Ike Rabb, and his wife, Jane, plus 2 employees and a friend, 5 human beings in the small shed, suddenly invaded by a man wearing a jumpsuit and a rubber monkey mask and brandishing a big silver 9mm automatic. The blur of movement in the back of the room was Ike diving for a 20-gauge shotgun on a shelf 4 feet from where he stood. Pistol rounds flew this way and that, denting a steel file cabinet here, punching an adding machine over there, until Ike fired the double-barreled blast of number 4 duck shot that ended the argument. When the dust settled, the nearsighted bandit lay dead in a pool of his own blood, his identity and his embarrassment concealed by the rubber mask that fit so snugly he'd been forced to leave his eyeglasses in the getaway car. Someone said there were more bandits in the yard. I took the dead robber's pistol outside and traded volleys with the 2 other masked men until they spun around and ran like hell in different directions, leaving behind their car, a 1975 black over yellow Ford LTD. Back in the business office, no one had a scratch. Ironically, when the robber had appeared, an employee was on the phone with the sheriff's office arranging for a deputy to escort Ike and Jane Rabb on the way to the bank for that day's deposit, which included an unusually large amount of cash, $15,700. A salvage pool acts as a broker between the insurance companies and salvage dealers, auctioning off the company clients' wrecked autos to dealers. For their efforts, the Rabbs collected a modest fee of $25 to $40 for each wreck they processed. At 24 or so wrecks auctioned every 2 weeks, it was a modest enterprise. In the last transaction that day, a salvage dealer named Frank Smith came and stuck around for 2 hours, haggling on prices and other details. Finally, at almost 6 p.m., he'd agreed to pay cash for about 50 wrecked cars. the biggest auto salvage dealer in the area. Smith was a multimillionaire bail bondsman who had been to the penitentiary twice, and over the past 2 years, he had caused the Rabs so much trouble and grief they reluctantly agreed to transact with him, only if he paid in cash. The total for the 50 wrecks that day came to $15,000. Smith handed over the money, signed the paperwork, got in his green Cadillac, and drove away. Witnesses spotted the Cadillac as it stopped alongside a yellow Ford LTD coming the opposite direction. Minutes later, the monkey-masked gunso stepped into the office, demanded the money, and started shooting. After the dust settled and the police sirens died out, fingers pointed to Frank Smith as the mastermind of the failed robbery plot. You might ask, why would a man pay a broker $15,000 for some wrecked cars only to have 3 hoodlums come and steal it back? But that was exactly what Smith had done, according to charges to investigators and the county grand jury. Later, federal arson charges added to Smith's troubles, and the FBI charged him with hiring a hitman to murder an important witness. It was one of the biggest criminal cases in the history of Travis County. The opposite number to Frank Smith's black cat picaresque was Ronald Dale Earl, the district attorney-elect of Travis County, universally known as Ronnie. Born in 1942, raised on his ranch outside Fort Worth, Earl came to Austin on the cusp of the 60s and found his heart and mind in perfect sync with the place. An Eagle Scout, an intellectual, and a wanderer in the woods. Ronnie graduated from the University of Texas, campaigned for equal rights, went through law school, and headed for places where he might fulfill his potential for greatness. He was appointed municipal judge in 1969 at age 26, the youngest judge in the state. In 73, he resigned and ran for state representative, won election, and was serving a second term in 76 when he set his sights on the district attorney's office. In that election, he outpolled his 2 rivals in the spring primary and was sworn in on January 3rd, 1977. The first item on his agenda would be prosecuting Frank Smith. Let me go on just a bit. Then there was Sheriff Frank. You know, Austin was in the middle of a big, progressive Democratic wave at the time. We had a long-haired mayor, and Ronnie had a Beatles haircut and a lot of progressive ideas. But he was no coddler of criminals. He came down on Frank Smith like a ton of bricks, using every weapon at his disposal. The sheriff had a relationship with Frank Smith. By 1976, Frank had been a fixture in the headlines for years. One reason being highly publicized accusations of corruption and impropriety involving his bail bond business. It's really seedy stuff, by the way. Many of the specifics of the complaints about Smith also involved Sheriff Raymond Frank, a retired Air Force veteran. Raymond Frank had run for county sheriff in 1972 on a platform that included promises to modernize the sheriff's department and to stop harassing pot smokers. Appearing in Converse sneakers and eschewing cowboy hats, Frank came on, superficially at least, like a breath of fresh air. He won election in 72 and was elected again 4 years later with the slogan, "The sheriff who shoots straight," implying that he was honest and incorruptible. But to his many detractors, his scraggly comb-over implied just how fraudulent he was. let me point out a couple of illustrations here. Here's the, we couldn't get the screen sharing to work, so we'll do it this way. This is a great photo, by the way. If you get a chance to look at, buy the book, but even if you don't, check out this photo. There's Sheriff Frank, there's his comb over, and he's picking up the rubber monkey mask with his flashlight. That's the arm of the robber, Willie McKnight, as he lay dead on the floor. And there's his toe of his Converse. Now, here we see Ike and Jane Radd. They were really salt of the earth type people from Louisiana with 6 kids. They moved to Austin to start this new enterprise. One reason they came to Austin was that they had a daughter who was deaf, and the state school for the deaf was there, and they wanted to enroll her there. And so, all right, they're just really cool people. Very, I mean, Frank came on like, Al Capone. He was, in his business practices, he just really bullied and beat up people and got his way and threatened, scared people to death, murdered people. But Ike and Jane would not budge. I mean, they fought him to a standstill until this robbery happened, and that's when everything blew up. And Frank started not getting his way all the time. And Ronnie was the perfect foil because he was, honest as the day is long. And, he knew where the levers of power were to come down on Frank and put him out of business long enough to get him in jail and keep him in jail for the duration until the trial started and a conviction on a very difficult case. But one of the aspects. Did you have a question, Jennifer? Yeah. Did you want to break?
No, we're good. Okay.
Here's a picture of Franklin Church with the family. That's right there. That's Tisha, named after his mother. She was about 16 or 17 there. His wife, Dorothy or Dottie, and that is her name is Marlo, the youngest daughter. The son is not pictured there, but the son, Alan Beto, was named after. Alan is for Governor Alan Shivers, whom apparently Frank got to know at some point, either through his father being a powerful Baptist preacher in Waco, and when he was in prison, because the other guy that his son is named after is Beto, after Dr. George Beto, who was the head of the Texas, correctional, whatever you call it, justice system at that time. So Frank went to prison at age 20 on his second felony conviction, and apparently did some heavy duty networking because after serving 3 years instead of a much longer sentence, he was paroled, and his job was to serve as a chauffeur for the governor. And the governor, after a few months, the governor gave him a full pardon on those charges that he was sent to prison for, which he was involved in car theft, but he was all, mainly a mastermind of robberies, home invasion robberies, not just, sticking up a liquor store, but he would pay guys $100 to steal a good getaway car, and he would find the victim in the case that he was convicted for and went to prison the first time, it was a prominent car dealer in Falls County, and Frank cased the job by going and doing a job interview with the guy, and he sent the robbers over there. They tied everybody up, including her daughter and her date, and cleaned them out. So really vicious stuff. Now here's Frank right there, age 20. That's when this happened. The conviction that he went up for the first time. I have got a paragraph I'd like to read, and then Jennifer might want to interrupt me and ask a question or something. 2 paragraphs, actually. This is Baptist preacher's son. Frank Smith was big as in larger than life. He stood 6'2", midsection like a beer keg, arms and legs like tree trunks. He drove a big Cadillac. He wore a big 10.5-carat diamond ring. Big impression. Big as in big business. In 1956, when he was 26, he founded what was to become a used auto parts empire in Central Texas, armed with $16 in his pocket and a cashier's check for $6,000. The latter, the proceeds from the sale of his paternal grandparents' farm, which he invested in a 10-acre wrecking yard on Interstate 35, just a few miles north of the Austin city limits. By the 1960s, Frank Smith and Sons Auto Parts were the biggest wrecking yard in Austin, and Frank Smith was a power to be reckoned with. In 1974, he applied for a license to write bail bonds and rented an office in the Stokes building, located practically across the street from Travis County Courthouse. Bail bondsmen were not I just thought were not supposed to promote their services inside the sheriff's office or the jail. But it wasn't too hard to find the business cards and even the occasion office calendar advertising their services. Or yardsticks. Yardsticks. A lawyer friend of mine, whom I wrote a book with, his daughter gave this to me after he died. It was in his office. And the lawyer's name was Broadus Spivey. He had been the head of the state bar and other prominent, very respectable attorney, organizations. Great guy, brilliant guy, ultimate country lawyer. And so I worked with him for a couple of years on this book. It's a good book too. Not broken. If you have any Lubbock connections, you might really dig this book. It's a long story. But Broadus knew of my interest in Frank Smith because of my previous book, this one, which is kind of the generation before the 1970s gangsters that this book is about. And he told me some great anecdotes about Frank, because he had said he represented him on some of his problems with the bail bond board. He was trying to take his license away because he was like hiring some of his clients to burn down houses for insurance money, getting sex from the girlfriends of some of his clients, stuff like that. And so Broadus told me a couple of great stories. But in my research for this book, I found out that Broadus represented him for a long time and did a lot of work for him. And unfortunately, Broadus didn't live long enough for me to ask him more questions about that. I mean, he was a lawyer. That's what lawyers do. They represent people who have legal problems. But some of the stuff was pretty dark. And so I wish I could have gotten more details from Broadus, but I didn't. So that's a little introduction to Frank. I have one more paragraph I want to read, and then We'll shift gears. Down on East 11th Street Strip in East Austin, the pimps and prostitutes and other nocturnal hustlers recognized Smith's 1975 green Cadillac and mountain of silhouette. Prostitutes and dealers called his name, shook his hand, and reveled in his cornpone jive. Pimps and drug dealers identified with his accoutrement, the Cadillac, the chunky gold rings, the leather jacket, the two-tone shoes, the woman on his arm who was not his wife, nor his color. As a bail bondsman, he had worked this community of crime, vice, and alternative lifestyles like a preacher doling out personalized blessings for every member of his flock. Frank was a necessary hero, villain of the underground economy, a Robin Hood who came on like Fat Elvis, the junkyard Elvis, the redneck rapper, the godfather of mixed metaphors, Don Corleone, as reimagined for Hee Haw. So I had to get that in there. Jennifer, you have any questions for me?
Are we ready to do a couple questions?
Yeah.
All right. So you've been talking about Frank quite a bit, but your book has two main characters. So you have Ronnie Earl and Frank, who seem, as you said, complete polar opposites of one another. You've talked about Frank a lot. What stands out about Ronnie in the exact opposite of kind of how Frank was?
Yeah. Well, Ronnie was an intellectual and a seeker. His mind was always growing. He went into his positions of government, looking for ways to help people. Frank hated authority of all kinds, cops, the courts, everything. Ronnie saw institutions as tools for helping people, and he went into those institutions and sought reforms to make them work better and serve the people better. One area of great accomplishment for him was in victim services. He made sure that victims of violent crime could get help and would know the status of the cases against the offenders and could be protected against them. And that was not only a way to help the victim, but it also helped get these crimes prosecuted successfully. Like with children's, there was a thing called the Children's Advocacy Center that was for child victims of abuse. And in addition to counseling and care for these kids, they also work with them to help get their the abusers convicted and get them put in jail, get counseling, whatever. He worked both sides of these crimes. He looked at crimes like, okay, a crime was committed. What was the harm? What's the solution to help the victims? What in the community can be addressed to try to make that not happen again? So he was brilliant, and his mind kept going. And weirdly ironic coincidence was that he grew up just outside Fort Worth on a cattle feeding station, or sheep feeding station, I think it was, but they raised cattle. And right next door to Fort Worth, where things were really rocking and rolling on the Jacksboro Road, with the gamblers killing each other every night, and all sorts of vice, and just like the old days of Chicago of Al Capone. It was really crazy. And so he grew up next door to this stuff. And he came to Austin, and a lot of the guys that Frank Smith hired to do his dirty work were from that same area, Haltom City, which is kind of almost the same thing as Birdville, which all became incorporated into Fort Worth later on. So I was hoping that somebody that joined this meeting might be able to tell me what was going on with Haltom City. I mean, I kept coming up with all these hoodlums who came from there, and other than used car dealerships, which all these guys were used car dealers, what was going on there?
I don't know much about the history of this of that particular area. Do we have anybody in the room that has some insight? Oh, we do.
Holmes is east of Fort Worth and was the home of George Wilderspin. George Wilderspin ran the professional gambling operations for Benny Binion from Dallas because Amon Carter knew about gambling in Fort Worth and didn't care about it. He just didn't want to go back to Dallas making money. So Wilderspin fronted for Benny Binion, and he had a gambling hall in Haltom City and was arrested for that. He was a cattle trader. He was very close to Benny Binion. So I guess my question for you is, the people that pulled the robbery, you said were from Haltom City?
So I'm gonna repeat your question. So he's asking. So the people who did the robbery for Frank Smith, they were from Haltom City. That's correct?
Okay. Some of them were. There were 3 robbers who went out on the job, and that was Robert Willingwood Knight, and he was from Haltom City, and Amon Armstrong, who was a disgraced former detective from the Fort Worth, Tarrant County Metro Squad. He was from there also. Another guy, it was never really fully figured out what involvement he had in the robbery. His fingerprints were found inside the getaway car. And these guys were used car dealers. They hung around with each other. Who knows, how that happened. But that was Guy Henry Collins. And he's an interesting guy. He was facing several criminal indictments at the time. 2 of them for drugs and weapons, and another one for the previous January. A witness saw him shoot a customer in the head in a dispute over a down payment for a car. And we wonder why, used car dealers get a bad reputation. My question for you is, who did you say had a gambling operation in Haltom City?
So
Named George Wilderspin.
George Wilderspin.
Okay.
George Wilderspin.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know
then
that name.
Benny
I don't know
Binion, right?
much about that.
Right. And Benny Binion, which I think you talked about in the book, Jesse, as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And then you had said that Amon Carter knew about that stuff going on, but he didn't care as long as it wasn't people from Dallas.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
George Wilderspin ran Benny Binion's operation in Fort Worth and collected the money and took it to Benny in Dallas.
Okay. Cool. Right.
By the way, I was brought a Spivey's investigator for 17 years. I also was Ned Granger's investigator.
Oh my God.
And I was in the county attorney's office when all of this went down with Frank Smith.
What's your name?
John Ludlam.
John Ludlam.
Right. And
Nice to
as a
meet
matter
you.
of fact, Ned had me go get Teresa when she ran away from home. I'll have to call her and remind her.
You know,
been years. I've seen her.
well, it's a small world, isn't it? So,
It's
smaller.
small. But the reason I asked about Haltom City was because not much went on as far as professional gambling and hit people out of that area without George Wilderspin and Benny Binion knowing about it. And that's why I wondered if George Wilderspin's name ever came up when you were writing the book.
well, no, only in like, you know, I would go off on these side tangents with Benny Binion and Herbert the Cat and all that stuff. But McKnight, have you read the book?
No, as a matter of fact, I ordered it and it's due in sometime, I think, this week.
Okay.
But I look forward to reading. I read the one about Timmy Overton and Don Jester, and I was living in Austin then, but they were a little bit older than I was.
Yeah. Run around with them.
And I know Bill Pryor and Frank Bates and I worked together on a lot of cases.
Cool. Well, with McKnight, you will see that he was hooked up with Walter Mark Flanagan. You know that name? He had
Flanagan?
Walter Mark Flanagan. He had a burglary gang, and they
No, I don't remember him.
they were bad boys, and they were, I believe, tangentially tied to the Hollis, Delois, and Cecil Green gang. So they're, you know, it came out of the same time period. So, McKnight, let me read about McKnight here. This is kind of fun.
We need to chat sometime.
Yeah, let's trade links or whatever, you know.
If it's okay with you, Jesse, I can give him your contact information when
Yeah.
we're done.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. And it's LUDLUM like the author.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't get any royalties.
Yeah. Well, gosh, I gotta find a place. It's called The Usual Suspects in here, but here we go. Okay. Robert Willie McKnight. In a mugshot taken a few years earlier, he had short, dark hair and black horn-rimmed glasses that made him look nerdy and forlorn. More recently, McKnight had adopted the trademark 1970s outlaw look, long, shaggy hair and salt and pepper whiskers. Dead at 38, McKnight had a criminal record going back to at least 1953, when as a 15-year-old youth offender on probation, he stole a car and led police on a 100-mile-per-hour chase. Given a reprieve instead of a term at reform school, he got in a knife fight on his first day back at school. The freckle-faced boy described in earlier accounts became a fixture in the Haltom City underworld, an accomplished safecracker, burglar, armed robber, drug smuggler, and member of a left-out counterfeiting, infamous criminal outfit known as the Walter Mark Flanagan burglary gang. McKnight had served 6 years in the federal pen from 54 to 60 for transporting stolen cars across state lines, a criminal activity he had in common with Frank Smith. McKnight had gone back to federal prison in 63 for another 2 years, this time on a conviction for counterfeiting. In recent years, McKnight had owned a used car dealership in Haltom City. He had borrowed the Ford LTD back in August to sell on consignment. So, anyway, I was fascinated with just how determined this guy was to be bad. And same with the other guy, the cop I mentioned, Eamon Armstrong. He joined the Fort Worth Police Department in the 60s and became just this hero cop. He was a hard charger, known as a relentless investigator. There were lots of I was going to show you all these headline stories about 100-mile-per-hour chases that chase down bank robbers and grocery store robbers. In fact, in the early 60s, there was a big headline about chasing down this guy who had robbed a Buddy's supermarket of quite a bit of money. I was kind of surprised at the sums that some of these places had in cash. And I think a lot of times, not necessarily Buddy's, but like you read about a cafe or something getting robbed of like, $20,000 back in the 60s or 70s, and go like, what was going on there? Gambling, probably, right? So Buddy's supermarket, and in 1978, after he had been he had been forced to quit, he was busted himself. He and two other guys had yanked this safe out of they had a van, a stolen van. They put a winch on, and they hooked it up to the safe in a Buddy's supermarket, not the same one, and yanked it out the window. And unfortunately, they rigged it up wrong, and they couldn't get it up into the van, so they just drove off, dragging the safe. And they made it about a mile before they hit a pothole, and it got stuck, and everything went haywire, and they got busted. So it was kind of ironic there. And a couple of years later, Armstrong was shot to death in a robbery. He was just a weird guy. I mean, he really had something driving him, and it wasn't good.
So I'm going to ask you another question. You've written about crime in Austin fairly often, from your detective series to this book and your previous book about the 1960s gangsters. What keeps pulling you back into looking at Austin from the lens of crime?
Yeah, it's funny. I got into this partly because, well, wanted to write crime fiction like Raymond Chandler, the Dashiell Hammett, the classic private eye stories. And I thought, well, I got a great gimmick. I'll make him a musician, and we'll have that same code of honor, sort of similar code of honor type thing, like a tarnished knight going and helping people, navigating the mean streets of the blues clubs and whatnot. But so I did that. I did 3 novels like that, and but it hit me some years later that really I had that experience with crime myself that was more meaningful than the fiction I was trying to write, and that was 1976 when my music career was just getting started. I was out playing at a gig in San Antonio and came home. Well, my girlfriend had been murdered by it turned out by a serial killer, and this case, I was a suspect. They find so often it's the spouse or boyfriend, that does these things, and I had long hair, and they, treated me, badly, but the killer was found and prosecuted, and but the thing is, this haunted me because I had to shut my memory down for years and years, and not, so I wouldn't think about that and freak out. It was very, disturbing, to say the least. So basically this time period was kind of stolen from me because I had to put so much effort into blocking it out. So 25 years after the murder, I decided to write about it because I also had a very serious case of cancer. I thought, well, if I could finish this book, I'll survive, because I got to, writing the book's a real pain in the ass. You got to dedicate yourself and blah blah blah. So I went back and researched this crime and what who the guy was, how he was able to not get caught for years, and and why he didn't get the death penalty. I didn't understand that. So I went back and I researched this thing, and it was fascinating and horrible at the same time. And while I was doing this research, I found the story of the Overton gang, because the same week that the murder happened, uh, an old member of the Overton gang was shotgunned to death as he nodded out in the massage parlor he owned, massage parlor that happened to be partly funded by Willie Nelson. And so all these things came together. This music scene, the Austin groove of the 70s, and this other side of the city that, just really wasn't that well known. It just kind of opened up this whole world to me, just like, like Raymond Chandler looked around in Los Angeles in the 1930s and 40s and said, wow, this is so crazy, you can't make it up. But he fictionalized what he wrote. So I got into that, and I just couldn't let it go. And so I wrote the Overton story, which I've got here. You know what that book looks like. Anyway, and it just shows a different side of Austin. And then I went back to do the Armadillo book with Eddie Wilson. And this is really the ultimate 70s Austin story, because the place opened in 1970 and closed the last day of 1980. Oh, yeah, here's a bunch of gangsters. So this story, the Frank Smith story, was such an adjunct to the Overton gang era. He was around when they were operating and trying to take over the vice in town, and just being, they had this criminal ecosystem going that was also part of the social makeup of the city, the after hours clubs and blues and stuff. So many people were telling me, look, hey, you wrote about the Overtons, you really ought to write the Frank Smith story. And I finally said, yeah, I'm gonna do it. So I did it, and that might be the end of it, or who knows, might be more.
Who knows? Well, we've got about 15 more minutes, so I want to make sure if anybody in the room has questions, to ask your questions, and I'll repeat them. And all right, we got a question.
Yeah.
Did you know that Willie Nelson's nephew was a deputy sheriff for Raymond Frank?
No, I sure didn't. What was that? What was his name?
That was one of Bobby Nelson's sons. His name was Randy Fletcher. And Randy Fletcher did a lot of work for Willie Nelson. And the thing that the FBI came to me on, and the Department of Public Safety, was they were suspicious that Raymond Frank was protecting Willie Nelson's drug trade. And so,
you know what?
Here we go.
It's funny. It's really funny that you mentioned that, because just in the last few days, I started looking at these stories about this another botched robbery out on Cuernavaca Road, Austin, what's it called? Lake Austin Estates. And apparently Willie and his friends and family had houses out there, and it's a good place to go score a lot of pot. And one afternoon, these masked men showed up at somebody's house who, was dealing pot, and tied everybody up and was trying to get all their dope and money and stuff. And Willie's son, Billy, showed up to hang out, I guess, something, and they ran off and went down, saw what was going on, and went down to the Maverick Mart nearby and picked up a bunch of guys, 6 of them, I think, and drove back there to rescue them. And he went up to the door, and they started shooting at him, and he ran. And a neighbor got his 30-30 out of the house 100 yards away and shot the driver. And the guys decided to split then and shot the driver in the head. And the other guy, they arrested him. I thought it was kind of, he claimed he was washing his car when he saw this stuff going on. It was 100 yards away, a deer rifle. I don't know. It was suspected that he might have been a lookout. And there was a big so cluster, whatever, between Raymond Frank and Ronnie Earl, because the sheriff didn't like the way the DA was, trying to take over the investigation, and somehow, and in all of this mess of the dope, disappeared. So what do you say about Willie's guys getting protected? That fits right in there, don't you think?
All right, so we've got a couple questions online. This first one is really for me, so I'm going to answer it. Can we get signed up automatically for future events? Unfortunately not, but since the person who's asking, you had to use your email address to sign into Zoom, I can send you some links and afterwards to next week, and you can choose the ones you want to sign up for individually. And then the next question is for Jesse. Do you have a comment on the current Caitlin Armstrong case, the love triangle, the murder of the the world-class women's cyclist? Do you know anything about that case that's going on right now?
All I can say is, wow. That's all I can say. That's a hell of a mess. I mean, it's like something you make up. But I don't have any insight.
And what about crime today versus crime in the 70s in Austin?
I don't care for the drug trade stories. They really bore me. I'd much rather research and write about safe crackers and stuff like that. I'm not going to say, oh, it seems like a more honest, worthwhile crime. It's just, to me, it's just more interesting. And I don't know if violence has really gotten worse or not, but they didn't seem to kill people as much. And certainly the things that they were stealing and dealing with weren't killing people as much as drugs are. So, and criminals, they're dysfunctional people. I mean, I don't want to, lionize any of them, but I mean, on the other hand, just about all of them are, something wrong happened to them. They weren't born that way. So, I kind of tend to empathize with them a little. So it's something about in retrospective on crime, and looking back in a historical picture, it just seems easier to make sense of things the way society worked. I look at the way society works now, and it's very confusing. It's very confusing.
So we're waiting to see if anybody else has a question. We've talked about this a little bit, but Austin of the 70s is very different from Austin today. Can you talk about what Austin was like then?
The first thing that always comes to mind for me is what? Can you hear me?
There we go. Yeah, you froze for just a second. There we go.
Okay. The first thing that comes to mind is the size. It was Austin was and still is in some senses very compact city. So that the downtown and the South Congress, East 6th Street, the places where the clubs were, and the Capitol, if you care about that, and the university. So all in this small area. And so I was smoking back then, and I noticed that you could go anywhere in town, across town, any direction, in the time it took to smoke a cigarette. And today, you might, if you still were dumb enough to smoke, you might only get a mile going down I-35. So it just made the city seem more graspable. This is Austin. It's here. People come to town. You take them out, and one night you go like 4 or 5 clubs, see all these different bands, and that's not so easy anymore. It was grittier. It was more somehow the fact that the rural areas, and the fact that anywhere in town you live, it would not be that unusual for somebody to have a goat or a pig in the backyard, right? The rural vibe was more present, and so that affected the vibe somewhat. And there's a sort of magical moment that lasted for a long time. In the early 70s, they lowered the drinking age and the age to vote. And so it just suddenly there's this influx of young people that are in the economy. They're supporting the arts, music especially, and it really affected the political as well as social vibe of Austin. And Austin's changed an awful lot, but that's still that personality is still pretty strong.
All right, so we have another question. I'm happy to just repeat it if you want me to.
Yeah, sure. I was wondering if he envisions using his works towards a documentary
So
for the preservation and history of Texas.
So the question is, have you thought about using the works that you've written towards a documentary for some of the preservation of the history of the state?
I got to be honest and say no, but I've donated my research files to the Austin History Center. They're so great. Without them, I couldn't have done this book. And no, I haven't thought about documentary at all. I used to write documentaries. I've done a lot of work in that field. But we're talking. We are getting inquiries from some producers about doing an adaptation of a series.
Ooh, I like that. All right, so I feel like we probably just have time for one more question. And so I'm actually going to ask, are you working on anything new?
You know what? I have to be honest and say no. I'm still researching. I'm digging into these stories and looking at stuff. I know I have a book planned, and that's really hard to say because it's the first time in forever they have not known what we're going to do yet. But my wife and I moved out to California to have a sabbatical, and so to paint and see if talk to our connections in the business here, and sort of do a year-long LA thing. So when I get back to Austin, it's more likely that I'll be working on something.
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. And thanks for everybody who joined us online and in the room. If you haven't already, I hope you check out this really great book. We do have copies in the library's collection. We also have several of Jesse's other books in the collection. If you'd like to purchase a copy of today's book, You can pick one up at our local independent bookstore here in Fort Worth, the Dock. You can order it online. You can go in person and get them. And just thanks for coming out. We have a bunch more author visits coming up between now and the end of the year. So visit our website, fortworthlibrary.org, and check out our calendar for upcoming events. And thanks, Jesse, for your time tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jennifer, and all your Fort Worth cats. I really appreciate it a lot.
Have a great evening.
You too.
Bye-bye.